It's amazing, isn't it, that it's 2024? It's absolutely unbelievable. In a certain recess of my mind, 1998 feels like an incredibly futuristic year. Happy New Year. And I'll say a little bit at the end of this very brief chat what I wish for you. But I want to focus very briefly today first on our own boat, because that's a precondition for anything else. We so often talk about Western support for Ukraine, and that's a matter of us giving stuff from our boat, and our capacity to give stuff from our boat, to do things from our boat, to plan things from our boat, to organize things from our boat is predicated, of course, on our capacity to, first of all, not try to eat each other up inside that boat, and to manage holes in the bottom of the boat and other challenges. So these are some of the challenges that I think 2023 didn't reveal but emphasized that we're going to have to think more deeply about in 2024. And I'm going to keep them general deliberately rather than raise key issues like Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine or the climate crisis. One pattern, and I think I've got 8 here, is the decency of ordinary people. And you might think that's a beautiful thing to say, but actually, let's be real, humans are human. And humans are human and human and human and human. And that means various incompatible kinds of things about the decency of human beings. But what worries me is when we increasingly have a breed of politicians coming to dominate in high politics who are very arguably less decent than the average ordinary person you can get off the street, when in fact they're in a job of almost sacred demands on the virtue of responsibility. It's scary, and we've got to reflect more on being in an age when ordinary people are more decent than a lot of their political, not all, of course not all, but a lot of their political representatives. And no, we do not go from what I've said into the lazy view-generating move, which says our institutions are all gone and they're all ineffective and corrupt and they're only capable of betraying us. The only alternative to bad institutions is better institutions. Right? The only thing you're going to get if you rail against institutions is YouTube views. A second pattern that 2023 emphasized is the incapacity, and I want to put the same warning here on the institutional point, but the incapacity of journalistic institutions to call out the lies of irresponsible populist politicians. And I say irresponsible populist politicians because not all populist moves in politics are irresponsible, actually. That's a conversation we've already begun to have on other occasions. Because we have a generation of not liar but post-truth politicians who don't confuse us about particular matters of fact, but who confuse us about whether there is even a difference between a fact and a lie in principle. These politicians are really difficult for journalistic institutions to deal with, because these are institutions that are themselves defensive. In a crisis of trust, they're one of the first targets. And there's plenty of mistakes that have been made and are still being made. But it's hard because how do you call out a lie if there are 74 of them per week? But at the same time, if that is what they are, they have to be called out as such. That's a very difficult thing to deal with, a balance to strike. But I'm worried about our capacity to just flatly call people out in politics for what they're doing. 3, the incapacity of old school politicians to take on irresponsible populists, whether that's taking them on at their own game or whether that's taking them on at a different game that's effective. You know, we have a crisis of this because we still have an old centrist political mentality that, just like the depoliticized blob in the middle in Russia, you know, we have these issues too, just fantasizes that these baddies who are threatening to take power are simply going to dissolve and go away, that they don't need to be taken on effectively. We've got to be able to take on anti-democratic politicians in a much more effective way, and there are ways to do this. 4 is hard because we're still not on top of it at all. There's an anti-democratic counter-revolutionary wave against hyper-identity politics. And what is so hard for us to grasp is that hyper-identity politics is a problem and a threat to democracy. But the counter-revolutionary wave against it is also a big threat, and a bigger threat indeed, to democracy. And there's a risk for folks on the right of whatever is left of the ideological spectrum to just buy into this counter-revolutionary wave, even though it's destructive and anti-democratic. And there is risk for folks in the center and on the left of what's left of the ideological spectrum to not see that the target of that wave is also a very big political problem. That it's not just the counter-revolutionary wave that's a danger to democracy, but the target of that wave is itself perhaps a lesser but still a significant danger. And we're going to help ourselves see that better. It's a problem that is really, really thorny because there's virtually nobody who sees the full picture. 5, the incapacity of the center of politics to grasp that anti-democratic populism is, to some extent, an understandable blowback against its own policies, right? And we got to put front and center taking on people who want to break the democratic game. But we can't just dream away our own responsibility for how everything that's going on has come about. Polarization in many varieties. And we've just witnessed one over the last few months after October 7th in the Middle East. And what happened in the West is that we really struggled to see the full story. We both struggled to acknowledge the barbarity of what happened on October 7th, but we also struggled to understand the human catastrophe that the response to that barbarity constituted, and to hold accountable those engaged in that response. Both, right? We've got segments who can do one, segments who can do the other. Our capacity to hold both has been a kind of a revelation of our cultural deficiencies. There is a general attack on thought, truth, and reflective social critique, and here is the danger. This is 7. The issues that we're passionate about, most of us consume information about those issues that is itself a form of propaganda, a form of advocacy for the cause. And there's a lot of room for that, and that can do a lot of good. But there's a risk that we lose an understanding of how powerful thinking about something slowly is, without trying to prove that your side is right, and how that in many instances is actually the most powerful thing you can do for your side. One of the things that I am very old-fashioned about, and I am terribly not old-fashioned in so many walks of life, but in this way I'm very old-fashioned, and that is that truthful critique is what keeps our democracies going. When we give up on truth, we give up on robustness of being accurate and sincere at the same time. We're going to undermine the ship of democracy to perhaps an irreparable extent. And that's why I'm so passionate, actually, about a robust truthfulness, not to be lost out of sight when it comes to any important issue you can name. And 8, of course, is our lack of strategic capacity on the global scene, of which Ukraine is just one victim among others to come. And everything I have listed is part of this domestic democratic incapacity that contributes so dramatically to our incapacity to operate strategically on the international scene. Join me for a very brief ritual, because I want to share with you my New Year's resolutions, and I want to hear yours in the comments. So I got 4 resolutions. One is to progress from being a 12 to being a 14-year-old public intellectual in my levels of maturity. 2 is to explore more, not necessarily on this channel, but to explore more the urgent need for research into a condition that I suffer from, myalgic encephalomyelitis. 3 is really hard given my health, but to put something out in the mode of professional academic philosophy. And 4, this is really the one that brings it all together for me, to keep dancing with my illness and explore how I can do more of the impossible. I want to hear about your resolutions, and meanwhile let's raise a very small glass, which I'm delighted to do as a wine lover who doesn't drink wine, which is not a choice but really a matter of my health situation. This is a very, very humble wine from Jim Clendenin from the hills north of Santa Barbara. I'm really wishing that your New Year's resolutions come true, at the very least, that there are surprises about special ways of moving closer toward them than you might have thought is possible. And I also wish that our political world seems more intelligible to us, and that the process of making sense of it doesn't cause us despair, to hope. And many conversations on this little table with beauty and love as a part of our way of engaging with the world. And I've got to take a sip for all of our 2024. And one last toast to everybody in Ukraine who've been in our thoughts for what is going to be in February, already 2 years. And about this, we're going to talk so much. Lots of love. Bye-bye.